Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to Bhagavad-gita Satsang. It's a pleasure to have the opportunity to be here with you once again, an honor to have you all here with me. And I hope you all had a very nice break, very nice holiday, and I see more of you are popping in as we get started. So thank you very much for being here. I am looking forward to diving into this evening's class. And first, I just want to make sure that I can be heard. So if you would be kind enough, those of you who are on computers, yes, raising your hand. Therefore, some of you know the drill. Okay, thank you very much. Now that I know that I can be heard, let's take care of some of our other housekeeping business. For those of you who are new to the satsang, you can adjust your audio settings and your viewing options up in the upper right-hand corner. You need not worry about your microphone or video camera. You can see and hear me. I cannot see or hear you, but if you would like to be heard, please type something into the chat window first and foremost, and I will put the Q&A up as well so that I can look at that in case you want to tell me something over there. Meanwhile, last class, 2 weeks ago, we spoke about, we opened up the chapter on the yoga of differentiating between divine and demonic natures. We spoke about the characteristics, or rather Krishna told us about the characteristics of saintly persons, the characteristics in a general way of demonic persons, and we spoke about the pros and cons of both. In our next segment, Krishna will tell us how to recognize a demon. I'll talk a little bit about vultures and jackals and Putin and fracking and horrible deeds meant to destroy the world. We're going to cover verses 7 through 12. So horrible deeds meant to destroy the world, how to recognize a demon. You may find that this could be sort of a buzzkill episode of our Gita Satsang. So just forewarned is forearms. I will speak a little bit about how we temper the buzzkill part of this. That is to say, some things to consider that put it in a little more positive light than you might think about. I had said previously we were going to talk about lust, anger, and greed. That phrase actually shows up at the end of the chapter. Now, there's no shortage of it in what we're going to speak about this evening, but that specific phrase is going to show up later. So I'm going to save that for later. Before we go any further, let's chant our invocation mantra, and I'll explain a little bit about the diacritical marks that give us the pronunciation cues in transliterated Sanskrit. The dot over the M indicates that we close our lips as we normally would with an M sound, but at the same time, we also close the back of our tongue up against the back of the roof of our mouth. And the bar across a vowel indicates an open and elongated version of that vowel as opposed to without a bar, in which case it's a shorter and more contained sound. And with that, I will chant this mantra, and if you like, you can chant it back. Here we go. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Translation. I offer my respects to the Supreme Person, the Son of Vasudeva, who is the all-pervading transcendence, indicating both Vishnu, the Supreme Person, who is everywhere all the time and therefore omniscient, and also Krishna, who is Vasudeva, the son of Vasudev. Krishna being the speaker of Bhagavad-gita, naturally, this mantra is our invocation mantra. Last week, chapter 16, verse number 4, Krishna gives an overview of demonic characteristics. So, pride, arrogance, conceit, anger, harshness, and ignorance. These qualities belong to those of a demonic nature. So, the commentators on these verses speak about how those possessed of a demonic mentality like to make a show of religion, but they take religion and stand it on its head, basically. They take irreligion, call it religion, and therefore justify doing what amounts to demonic things according to Bhagavad-gita and the Vedic spiritual culture from which the Bhagavad-gita arises. They're not actually following principles of Dharma, universal principles of Dharma. So we're going to move into a more detailed description of what Krishna regards as demonic characteristics by which we can recognize someone who is possessed of that mentality. This week's verses will be verses 7 through 12. But first, I want to talk about the 4 yuga cycles relative to divine and demonic natures. So you may recall there are 4 seasons of time in the Vedic conception of time. Seasons, just like we have 4 seasons, just like you could say there are 4 stages of life, birth, everything's new, getting older, more aware of problems in the world, old age, and eventually everything comes to an end. So similarly, we begin with Satya Yuga. And you notice if you're watching on the slide, it says different planets. What does that mean? What it means is that in Satya Yuga, which lasts for 1,728,000 years, and therefore, according to the Vedic calculation, begins about 3,800,000 years ago. So therefore, almost 4 million years back from where we are right now. Those of saintly or divine characteristics would take birth or appear on one planet or a particular set of planetary systems in the universe. And those possessed of a demonic mentality would take birth on other planetary systems. So they were separated by entire planetary systems. And the ancient texts of the Vedas, that is to say the Puranas, the Itihasas, the histories of the universe, describe interstellar warfare between the forces of good and the forces of evil. You may have heard about this in other places besides the Vedic scriptures. You may hear it again starting tomorrow, if I understand things correctly, or maybe on the 20th, I don't know, because I don't really pay attention to these things much. In the next Yuga cycle, Treta Yuga, people of demonic mentalities will take birth in one family, and people of saintly characteristics will take birth in another family, but they'll be on the same planets. So there's more of an opportunity for conflict on a single world. Then in Dwapara Yuga, people of saintly character and demonic character will take birth in the same families. Dwapara Yuga is when, the end of Dwapara Yuga is when the Bhagavad Gita is spoken. So Arjuna's dilemma, he's got to fight members of his own family. And Krishna is explaining to Arjuna that your family members are not all saintly people. So this is where we have the intra-family conflict and the fratricidal war for determining who will take the throne. In the that the Bhagavad-gita is spoken just before. And then after the battle is fought, I guess I gave away the ending. That signals the end of Dwapara Yuga and the beginning of Kali Yuga. And in Kali Yuga, divine and demonic natures appear within the same person. So we all have both a divine nature and a demonic nature, saintly and unsaintly, potentialities within us. There was a book written by R.D. Laing, psychiatrist, famous in the 60s and 70s, British psychiatrist, called The Divided Self. And we hear in various places about this idea of a divided self. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that as we go through our verses for this evening. Just park that out of the way. Okay, so as is our usual tradition, I'm going to go through each verse, just the translation, then we'll go back and we'll look at each verse in detail. We're covering, beginning with verse 7 of chapter 16. The translation is, people of an ungodly nature do not know what should be done or what should not be done. Neither cleanliness, nor proper behavior, nor truth is to be found in them. Text 8. They say that the world has no truth, no foundation, no Lord in control, that there is no cause other than the interactions of selfish desires. Text 9. Committed to this vision, such lost and malevolent souls possessing stunted intelligence engage in horrible deeds that bring about the world's destruction. Text 10. Clinging to insatiable desires, vanity, and arrogance, the demonic, attracted by the impermanent and deluded by illusion, affirm their commitment to impure actions. Verse 11, convinced that the gratification of selfish desires is the highest goal of life, they are afflicted by immeasurable anxieties that persist until the point of death. And text 12. Bound by 100 chains of hope and propelled by a mentality filled with lust and anger, they strive unjustly to secure wealth for the gratification of their selfish desires. All right. So now we'll go back to the first verse, and this first verse is the one that we are going to chant together this evening. So here we have the transliterated Sanskrit once again. And let me speak just a little bit again about the transliterated Sanskrit and the diacritics. So you can know a little bit about the proper pronunciation. A dot under an R is going to be an sound. So R's are never top teeth over bottom lip. So without a dot, it's a R sound, you like quick trill off of the cliff behind your teeth. And then The dot, you pull the tip of your tongue back to the center of, or even a little farther back from the center of the roof of your mouth. You pronounce both T's when you see two T's together. So you hit the first T, slam on the brakes, and then go forward from the second T. A C is always a CH sound. The A's with the bar across, I've already explained. A dot under an H at the end of a line means that you will echo a short version of the vowel that precedes it, irrespective of whether or not that vowel is short or long. A accent mark over an S indicates an SH sound, but made from all the way in the back of your mouth. So you're curling your tongue all the way back to the back of the roof of your mouth, as opposed to a regular SH sound that we make in English that comes out more right behind our teeth. Shh. Dot under the S is that regular SH sound. Shh. And that looks like all we need to know on this particular verse. So I'll chant each line, and if you like, you can chant each line back. Pravrittim cha nivrittim cha janana vidur asuraha na shaukam napi chacharo na satyam teshu vidyate. Translation once again, people of an ungodly nature. Ungodly translates the word asura. Sura, divine or godly, saintly. Asura, ungodly. The A being a negating prefix. People of an ungodly nature do not know what should be done, nor what should not be done. Neither cleanliness, nor proper behavior, nor truth is to be found in them. So this describes the material identity of a spiritual being who's fallen under the influence of the lower modes of material nature. So in previous chapters, we have discussed these three qualities of material nature: goodness, passion, and ignorance. And when a person, any spiritual being, falls deeply under the influence or intensely under the influence of these lower modes, they develop, or we can develop, this kind of mentality. So these behaviors are the opposite of God's characters and behaviors, hence ungodly, or asura, the opposite of saintly. Notice how the word shaucham was in this verse. Shaucham, cleanliness or purity, the first of the niyamas in Patanjali's Yoga-sutras. So when Patanjali speaks about shaucham, he speaks about the result of this personal observation, this personal practice. The result of cleanliness is detachment from the material body, seeing it for the bag of bones and goo that it is, rather than seeing it as an erotic object. Therefore, the practice of cleanliness makes it easier to control one's sexual impulses, or to practice brahmacharya, control of one's sexual energy, the redirection of that energy toward self-realization rather than the expense of it when we engage in sexual intercourse. So the opposite of this is attachment to and subsequent glorification of the material body. And our whole society is just permeated with glorification of the material body and the objectification of the body as an erotic object. I last month joined a gym in part because I needed to chauffeur someone to the gym on a regular basis. And I thought, all right, well, as long as I'm down there, I'll just get a membership and start making that part of my yoga practice. And aside from everybody in the gym being like very absorbed in bodily consciousness, you know, as I walk out of the men's locker room, there's a table with magazines, and the magazines are all about glorification of the material body. Advertisements on television are all about the glorification of the body and the acquisition of stuff for your body. The bottom line here is, if you think about our culture and our society in terms of the glorification of the body and the glorification of acquisition of material stuff as symptoms of a demonic mentality, then you have to come to the conclusion that we live in a very demonic society by the Bhagavad-gita's standards. Shaucham also refers to what we take into our bodies. And in the yoga tradition, the least desirable foods, the least desirable things to take into our bodies if we want to make spiritual advancement are the flesh of slaughtered animals and alcoholic beverages, which our society takes for granted as being normal. That's just how we roll. We'll talk a little bit more about this, but here I want to bring up a point about how we're mixed. That is to say, when we talk about these demonic natures, remember in the beginning I said that demonic and saintly characteristics will show up in the same person in Kali Yuga. For example, I have an aunt, and she's a very sweet and loving person, and she volunteers at elementary schools and libraries, and yeah, she's just a very loving, sweet person. And I used to go sometimes for Thanksgiving dinner to my aunt and uncle's home. And she knew I was a vegetarian, so she would take me around to the table and say, okay, you can eat this, you can eat this, you can eat this. And it was like a matter of, in her mind, it was what I could eat as opposed to what I was choosing to eat. It just seemed like a restriction that I had imposed upon myself. Anyway, she got to something and I said, well, wait a minute, what's that? And she said, that's sweet potatoes. And I said, no. Sweet potatoes don't just grow out of the ground like that. What'd you do to them? And she said, it's just sweet potatoes. It's sweet potatoes and cinnamon and something else and marshmallows. And I said, whoa, stop. Sorry, marshmallows. No good. And I had to explain to her about marshmallows and gelatin and where gelatin comes from. And she couldn't believe I actually knew that. But when you become aware of what is in food and you become careful about what you eat, well, you know, you just learn that stuff. You do your homework and find out. So, you know, I mean, the rest of the family, she's cooking turkey and ham and, you know, actually, let me put it another way. She's cooking a turkey and a pig for everybody else, and they're thinking it's all fine and good. And they're also thinking they're good people. And in some respects, that's true. So this is how things get jumbled up in Kali Yuga, how our divine and demonic qualities can intermingle in ways that appear to be perfectly normal by our regular society standards. Another word that shows up in this verse is satyam, or truthfulness, truthfulness, which is the second yama. So when truthfulness is established, then our words actually bear fruit in that we actually do what we say we're going to do without any ulterior motive. And that brings me to a story about a vulture and a jackal. Vultures and jackals, I didn't know this, they actually fight. And the reason they fight is because they want the same thing and they're competing for it. And the same thing that they want are dead bodies. Seems like a rather unfortunate thing to fight over, but that's actually what they do. So once upon a time, a family was grieving for the death of their son. And they were assembled together at the funeral pyre to burn the body, but they were first grieving for some time. And the jackal came, and the jackal said, you should take some time to grieve. You don't have to burn the body right away. Why don't you go home, grieve for your son, come back tomorrow, and then perform this ceremony. And the family thought about it. It seemed like the jackal had good intentions. And the vulture shows up and says to the family, you should not listen to the jackal, because the truth is that your son has left his body and then this body is just gone. There's no need for you to burn it. There's no need for you to be sad even, because the spirit soul cannot be killed. It is only this material body that dies. Therefore, you should just leave this material body and celebrate the life of your son. Also sounds like good intentions, even comforting, each in their own way. The jackal wanted them to go home and come back tomorrow because the jackal actually is a nocturnal eater. And while they're gone overnight, he's going to eat the body. He has an ulterior motive. The vulture wants to subvert the jackal's plan by getting to just leave the body now, because he'll eat it as soon as they leave. He won't wait for the night. So he's actually trying to get a jump on the jackal. So even though it sounds like a good intention, there's an ulterior motive. All right, so what does this have to do with Putin and fracking? Well, most progressive thinking people who are concerned about the quality of the planet and the quality of land and water anywhere near fracking is done is against it. There's a great deal of concern about what kind of damage to ecosystems is being done and to drinking water nearby and all kinds of other concerns. Well, Vladimir Putin came out against fracking in the United States, and he used his various propaganda outlets to make a case why fracking should not happen. And he used all kinds of arguments that sounded like they were concerned with the environment. But that's not what he was concerned about. What he was concerned about was that if fracking was successful, then the United States, his adversary, would become the #1 source of natural gas. And therefore, Putin's own natural resources that he wanted to exploit and sell would become devalued. So this is how sometimes something that sounds like it has good intentions actually doesn't have such good intentions. And so we need to look for what's really going on when we hear someone that we maybe suspect has a demonic mentality, and we see that it appears that maybe they're a good person after all. Well, maybe, or maybe not. Last quick note about truthfulness. According to Vachaspati Mishra, one of the commentators on the Yoga-sutras, one who is truthful gains control of the future. That is to say, a truthful person becomes empowered insofar as determining what their future births are. Whereas a demonic person cannot act on the basis of the true nature of the self, because they either ignore or deny the very idea of a distinction between self and body, or spirit and matter. So it's actually a very disempowering thing, even though those with demonic inclinations seem always somehow or other to acquire power. Well, in Kali Yuga. If you have any questions or comments about what I've covered so far, please go ahead, pop them into the chat, or if you like, the Q&A box, but the chat will allow the question to be shared with others. And while I await your questions, I will move on to the next verse, which is verse number 8. So we pick up with a little more elaboration on the relationship that those with the demonic mentality have with the truth. Krishna continues. They say that the world has no truth, no foundation, no Lord in control, that there is no cause other than the interactions of selfish desires. So this is a little esoteric. They say that the world has no truth, which is to say it's not true. It doesn't have any basis in an ultimate reality. There's no spiritual context within which the material world appears. It just shows up by pure chance. And therefore, Krishna says that this idea of pure chance, which we find in astrophysics and quantum physics, as the explanation for the existence of the universe, is demonic. Yet, there are, I'm sure, plenty of well-intentioned physicists genuinely interested in understanding the nature of the world, who go about their business based on this assumption. So this is precisely the opposite of what Krishna says in the 9th chapter of Bhagavad-gita, verse number 10. He tells us, under my direction, O son of Kunti, all moving and non-moving beings are brought forth by the power of this material nature. Hence, this cosmic manifestation revolves in cycles. So again, this idea of cyclical time, our 4 seasons of time that are nested into groups of 4 seasons, which are further nested into larger cycles, and then one large mega cycle of the lifespan of the complete cosmic manifestation. But it's all happening under Krishna's direction, as opposed to just happens all by itself. Which brings us to the next verse. This is now verse 9. Committed to this vision, such lost and malevolent souls, possessing stunted intelligence, engage in horrible deeds that bring about the world's destruction. So, the same physicists who care about finding out the truth of the world, they're also responsible for atomic weapons, which we know can bring about the world's destruction. And industrialization and technology are how we bring about the destruction of the world by way of climate change, global warming, and filling the oceans with plastic garbage. So there are a couple of words in this verse that are particularly significant, and I will go over those. The first is nashta atmanaha, having lost themselves. So nashta, having lost, atmana, the self. In other words, a person possessed of this mentality cannot see themselves, cannot actually see the true nature of the self. Therefore, it is said that they are lost to themselves. And how has this happened? The next phrase in this verse is alpa buddhayaha, which means less intelligent. Buddhi means discernment. Long-term goal-directed intelligence, but specifically the kind of intelligence that allows you to distinguish between spirit and matter. Another way to think about it is reason. So how do these things go together? Being lost to themselves by virtue of no capacity for discernment. All the way back in the second chapter of Bhagavad-gita, Krishna describes the progression into the state of illusion. This starts at verse 62 and concludes in the next verse 63. So I'm now referencing chapter 2, verses 62 and 63, when Krishna says, when one's thoughts dwell on objects that attract the senses, attachment to those objects develops. From attachment to such sense objects, the desire to satisfy the senses is born. And from the desire to satisfy the senses, anger arises. Anger arises because the senses are never satisfied, and even if they are satisfied momentarily, there's now the need to satisfy them again or continue with their satisfaction, which is very difficult to do. In the next verse, anger gives rise to bewilderment, and with bewilderment comes a loss of memory. When one's memory is lost, the power of discernment is lost with it. Buddhi nashat. Buddhi nashat, which is similar to alpa buddhayaha. As the power of discernment recedes, buddhi nashat, the self vanishes from view. So all the way back in the second chapter, Krishna has kind of set the table for what we are now reading in the 16th chapter about the nature of one who has gone through this process of attachment due to desire, and then anger and the loss of memory and the loss of intelligence. So this is now the logical result of that progression. Now, the other words that are significant in this verse, the Sanskrit ugra karmanaha. So karma, action, ugra, anger, horror. Engage in actions that cause pain or actions born of anger, acts of horror or cruelty. And these acts of horror or cruelty are kshayaya jagato. Jagat means the world or the universe. So kshayaya jagato means for the destruction of the world. So here we are in Kali Yuga, and we are concerned about the destruction of the world. And now that has become a real thing, a real short-term problem. We are facing an imminent global environmental catastrophe. And we've known this for some time, but now people are really starting to panic because it's no longer like sometime in the future. It's like 10 years from now is our point of no return. There's actually a United Nations climate conference going on, I believe right now as I am speaking, where world leaders are trying to wrap their heads around this reality. So, where is this coming from? Global greenhouse gas emissions come from a variety of economic sectors, that is to say, people engaged in various kinds of business. Agriculture, forestry, and other land use, meaning by forestry, this has meant the destruction of forests for the sake of creating pasture land for grazing animals. 24% of these gas emissions come from there, but it's actually more than that because transportation accounts for 14%, and the animals for food industry uses quite a bit of transportation, also uses quite a bit of electricity and heat production. So we actually have industrial food production via slaughtered animals and animal byproducts as really the #1 cause of global warming. The destruction of the earth by the consumption of fossil fuels comes in kind of second. Here are some other alarming factoids. 23% of global fresh water is used to feed to grow livestock feed, to grow something to feed to animals that will be slaughtered for food. Well, that's almost 1/4 of the fresh water supply on the planet. Imagine if that was redistributed to people. 14.5% of global greenhouse gases produced directly by livestock. 33% of global arable land is devoted to livestock feed. And 45% of all global land is occupied by the livestock system. Notice how we have this interesting word livestock as opposed to animals, people in animal bodies. All right, so is the animal for food industry the #1 cause of global warming? Is the thing that we should do to make the biggest impact on global warming, reducing the possibility of the destruction of our planet, to adopt a plant-based diet? Well, if that's true, that's not how it's going. Because actually the demand for all kinds of animal flesh is growing, particularly in China, where it's growing off the charts. So if that's going to be what it takes, then this is going to be a real challenge, because every predictor shows a projection of a greater demand rather than a reduced demand for slaughtered cows, slaughtered lambs, slaughtered pigs, slaughtered chickens, etc. But that's not the most important thing you can do insofar as personal choices go, because human beings are the biggest cause of global warming. In fact, they are the cause of global warming, and therefore having one less child, if you're planning on having children, is actually the personal choice that experts in this field recommend if we want to slow down the destruction of planet Earth by virtue of a warming climate. Eating a plant-based diet is in the sector of most important things you can do, but it's behind switching to an electric car, or buying green energy, or avoiding air travel, or living car-free altogether. But by far and away, the biggest impact is fewer people. Now, this is really a little problematic, and here's why. People who get this are likely to have fewer children. The people who don't get this are likely to have big families. And at least here in America, we have irreligion masquerading as religion, where it's actually a political strategy to have big children to generate values-based voters, and to perpetuate this culture of consumption that is destroying our planet. So here we have a pretty good example of how irreligion masquerading as religion shows up to further the cause of horrible acts meant to destroy the world. And if you have any questions about that or comments about that, please pop them in the chat as I move on to the next verse. This is now verse number 10. Clinging to insatiable desires, vanity and arrogance, the demonic, attracted by the impermanent and deluded by illusion, affirm their commitment to impure acts. So there is, you may have noticed, in our society, a portion of society, not just those engaged in what my guru calls cheating religion, but the captains of industry, the people who are making money off of all this, are doing their best to make you believe they're really not part of the problem. For example, as I was doing my research for this evening's class, I came across this curious bit of public relations from the beef industry, otherwise known as the slaughtered cow industry. The top line says that beef sustainability, meeting growing global demand by balancing environmental responsibility, economic opportunity, and social diligence throughout the supply chain. In other words, we're not, what this is saying is our industry is not going to sacrifice economic opportunity, the opportunity to make money off of this, for the sake of environmental responsibility, which would demand that we just stop doing this altogether. Rather, we're going to incrementally find ways to try to make things not as bad as they are. And all of the ways that are cited here on this poster have to do with applying technology to the process of raising, slaughtering, processing, and transporting dead animals. We refer to them, or our society refers to dead animals as cattle, beef, pork, ham, veal, as opposed to cows, pigs, and calves, because that objectifies the beings that we're talking about. So these kind of materialistic inventions, they're considered advancement in our society. The advancement of human civilization is measured in technology. But the result is that people grow actually more violent. It makes their cruelty more efficient. And, you know, people like this are considered to be enemies of the world because they're ultimately going to invent stuff that brings about the destruction of all of us. Because technology never really works the way you expect it to. There's always something else that happens that was an unintended consequence. So what we end up with is a group of people who are always in anxiety on account of accepting non-permanent things and constantly trying to fix things so that everything will be all right, rather than just fundamentally changing what they're doing. And that just doesn't help us. But they can't do it any other way because they're so attracted to the fulfillment of selfish desire, which requires the accumulation of material wealth. And as long as, you know, that's our motivation, or someone's motivation, then the world will still be propelled by such people toward a very hellish condition in the while all this time thinking that this is advancement. All right. And that brings us to the next verse, verse number 11. Convinced that the gratification of selfish desires is the highest goal of life, they are afflicted by immeasurable anxieties that persist until the point of death. Our society tells us that the fulfillment of our desires is the highest goal of life. We are encouraged to think just in terms of the short-term objectives of this life without considering karmic reactions that will show up in a future life, because there's no consideration for a future life, or everything is so distorted that we think that somehow or other there's nothing wrong here. There's no reaction to be had for slaughtering animals, because animals are understood to not actually be people or spiritual beings, not have souls. And so a theology or a doctrine that denies the soul of a living being makes it easy to rationalize anything you might do to that living being for the sake of satisfying your own desires. The anxiety comes because, we always have a plan for enjoyment and for establishing the enjoyment of those we care about. So our plans are never done. We are never ready to leave this body. We don't take any care to prepare for the inevitable departure from this body, because we've always got one more plan we've got to bring to fruition, something that we have to do. And it's never done for someone who is consumed by the gratification of selfish desires in a single life. Therefore, anxiety about this persists right up until the time one's life is done. And question or comment: our animal brothers and sisters are victims of tortured lives and senseless murder. The industry attempts to sanitize it. The industry's attempts to sanitize it are horrifying. I quite agree, Annie. Thank you very much for your comment. I'm inclined to agree, and it appears that Krishna is also inclined to agree. Which brings us to our final verse for this evening. This is verse 12. Bound by 100 chains of hope, and propelled by a mentality filled with lust and anger, they strive unjustly to secure wealth for the gratification of their selfish desires. By criminal means is another way to translate the word associated with unjustly. That is to say, by underhanded means, such people seek to gain influence, to make that which ought to be illegal, legal, for example. So the different industries that would take a financial hit were we to actually do the right thing about climate change, they spend a bundle of money on lobbying. So the agriculture, forestry industries, the electrical utilities in particular, and the fossil fuel businesses, they spend hundreds of millions of dollars on lobbying in order to not only protect themselves from any regulation or legislation that would prohibit them from making money, but to ensure that they are legally able to make more money, even though they already make a ton of money, more money than anybody actually needs, thanks to hitting various goals for the Shell Corporation, the CEO got a double of his salary recently, from $11 million to $22 million. I don't know about you, but I don't think anybody really needs that much money. This is an excellent investment, by the way, because these industries get an 11,900% return on every dollar they spend on Congress. If the fossil fuel industries spent $350 million to contribute to campaigns and lobbying efforts, but they get back $41.8 billion in subsidies. And you can check that out at priceofoil.org for more information. So this is how, by criminal means, by unjust means, those who are propelled by a mentality filled with lust and anger strive to gratify their selfish desires. So as we wrap up this evening, I'm going to go down a checklist of characteristics of those possessed by a demonic mentality. So you can just see it in a nice list. So here's the list. Number 1, unapologetic consumption of meat and intoxicants. The glorification of the material body and unrestrained pursuit of sensual enjoyments. The denial of an overarching truth as an object of knowledge. Postmodernists, take note. The denial of any underlying unifying substance of the world, or in other words, the denial of any spiritual existence or the difference between spirit and matter. The denial of the existence of the world as a real feature or a feature of reality. Voidism, the idea that ultimately everything is void, is herein described as a demonic mentality. Denial of any underlying cause of the world or the existence of God. Atheism is considered a demonic mentality. Promotion of the idea that the world exists by pure chance, with no reason for the world to be and no reason for us to be in the world. Promotion of the idea that we create the world by trying to manifest our selfish desires, that the world is created by our desires. So this doesn't say anything good about prosperity gospel, the idea of God will give you material wealth if he favors you. It also calls into question the idea of manifesting abundance, things like The Secret, laws of attraction, that sort of thing. Because what's your motive? If your motive is to manifest material abundance, then even though it looks like a spiritually way to do it, herein the underlying mentality is considered demonic. The invention of speculative religion that justifies demonic behavior. The pursuit of enjoyment in a world that doesn't really exist. In other words, you can do whatever you want because there are no consequences to your actions. The denial of the law of karma. A perpetual state of anxiety is another characteristic of someone possessed of a demonic disposition. And the use of underhanded means to make what ought to be illegal, legal. What ought to be punished, rewarded. So those who buy politicians and the politicians who sell themselves, both in the category of those possessed of a demonic mentality. Well, that covers a lot of people, like almost everybody, which means we have quite a mission on our hands. The first one is to look at ourselves and be honest. I mean, you can be kind of depressed about all this because, I mean, I know for myself, when I looked at this, I just saw a lot of myself in a lot of these demonic characteristics. And I thought, wow, I've got some serious work to do if I am to take the Bhagavad-gita as an authoritative message about what's saintly, good, and what's unsaintly or bad. And we shouldn't feel like down on ourselves or allow ourselves to fall into a state of low self-esteem. I'm such a horrible person, you know, that sort of thing. No, we should actually work from wherever we're at with optimism and determination, because we can do something about this. We can make incremental changes in our behavior. We can elevate our consciousness. We can purify our heart. Krishna is giving us not just information to file away, but things to take action on. So simply being honest and humble about where we're at, and just start from wherever we're at and proceed with the knowledge that Krishna is rooting for us and that Krishna will help us if we make a sincere effort to elevate our own position. Then the other is for pushing back. The other part of our mission is to push back against demonic elements of society and do our part to try to save the world. So spiritual activism is also part of our mission. Thank you for sharing these urgently important ideas. Bhagavad-gita is not just a religious book, quote unquote. It is living truth, which is eternally relevant. Annie, thank you very much for your comment. I am also inclined to agree. And if you have any other questions or comments, we are at the end of our program for this evening. So we'll wrap it up. Whoops, that's not tonight's class, that's next week. Let's see, do I know what tonight's class was? No, I don't. Or at least I don't know it on the slide. Tonight's program was how to recognize a demon, vultures and jackals and Putin and fracking, and horrible deeds meant to destroy the world. Next time, which will be next week, we will continue to verses 13 through 20. We will get inside the mind of someone who is possessed of this mentality. And Krishna will give us a look at the bleak future of those who are completely absorbed in this kind of mentality to the point of little or no return. If you have any questions after the fact, then please write to me, Hari at Hari-kirtana.com, pronounced Hari-kirtan, and I will be very, very happy to hear from you. Oh yeah, here's tonight's class as if it were next week. Okay, epic fail right at the end. Actually, any well-intentioned conversation about the Bhagavad-gita cannot be a fail, epic or otherwise. The very act of discussing these topics is spiritual, therefore liberating and enlivening, and I feel very enlivened to be able to share these teachings with you. So thank you all very much. Kavita, you're very welcome. My pleasure. Jill, you're very welcome. I'm very, very happy to have you all here with me, and I'm very happy to have those of you who are here after the fact with me as well. I look forward to seeing you next time, and until then, I hope you are all very well. And I will now end the meeting for all. Have a nice night.